Organized Crime and Intelligence Bureau. They assisted in apprehending 9 of these offenders who traveled to a specific location in Fairfax County to meet with who they thought was a child that they could engage in sex acts with. We know that these offenders often have communications with other offenders. They share child sexual abuse material and other information, and so we do anticipate that a lot of these cases will result in future arrests. That has happened in almost all of these operations. As we dig into more investigations, as the investigations don't stop when the arrest occurs. There's obviously evidence that the detectives will be analyzing following these arrests that may lead to other investigations and identifying other perpetrators and other victims. I do want to share some information that's particularly disturbing regarding the actions of these offenders who believe they were chatting online with children. Many of these offenders requested explicit images or videos from children. Some arrived to the meeting location with things like contraceptives, alcohol, and drugs that they planned to use with their child victims. Some sent the undercover detectives images of their own genitals and adult pornographic material to demonstrate the acts that they wished to perform with these child victims. At least one maintained online contact for months prior to making plans to meet. One suspect even traveled from Canada, believing that the child's victim's parents were out of town. One specifically described wanting to cause bodily harm to the victim during these planned sex acts. One suspect was already a registered sex offender, and one of the offenders admitted to having previously had sex with someone he believed was 12 or 13 years old. We're providing this information because we want to prevent the children in our community from being victims. Parents, we're asking you to please talk to your children about their activities online. Monitor the online activity of your kids. Technology eludes a lot of us who are older, and we know that it's hard to talk to your kids about something that you might not be as familiar with as far as the technology. I would point parents to go to missingkids.org. That's a webpage from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There's a tab for education, and you can look at some online recommendations and educate yourself about what your kids are being exposed to. For kids, it's normal to go online, but it is not normal for adults to form relationships with children online. If someone's contacting you that you do not know, please do not respond to them. If you have responded, just stop and tell a trusted adult, tell a parent, tell a guidance counselor, a coach, somebody who you trust what is happening. For the offenders, we want them to know that our investigations are continuing, and we're striving to protect everybody in the community. And we're asking anyone with information about these or any other predators to contact the Major Crimes Bureau at 703-246-7800, option 6, or Crime Solvers at 1-866-411-TIPS or 8477. And with that, we'll take any questions.
At this point, Carolina from WDCA. At this point, anything you can say about more on their behaviors? Anything else you can describe besides what you mentioned? Because I'm curious to see if they were targeting Hispanic kids, Black kids, Asian kids. I mean, I know it's a very specific question, but anything from your investigation that pointed towards that type of focus from them?
I don't have that specific information in front of me, and obviously we want people to have their day in court and have specific behaviors revealed as evidence. But generally, there's some gender, age range that they have a preference of, and that's who they're looking for. And I don't have specifics on each the suspects.
Chief Wright, can you take us through how this all starts, and what the process is like, and where you go online to find these people?
So there are various apps and websites and applications that detectives will go to that they know young people use, and oftentimes the predators will address them first and solicit their contact first. At some point during the conversations, the detectives who are posing as a young person will identify themselves by age and it's always obvious that it's going to be illegal to have continued contact and or meet up with them and have any kind of sexual relationship with them. Yes, ma'am.
Randy Bass with DC News Now. Thanks for taking our questions. Can you speak to some of the platforms that were used, whether detectives were on there waiting, or whether they, the detectives themselves who were behind this, were solicited for these kinds of activities and crimes? I mean, what kind of platforms were used here?
So there's the obvious ones that anyone knows that, young people use. Young people use Snapchat and Facebook Messenger or whatever messaging platforms, but there's always new apps popping up. And that's why I'm saying, I don't want to identify just one or two specific type of apps. There's always things that are popping up that parents need to be aware of. And detectives will go on any of these applications where they've identified perpetrators are operating, and they will wait to be solicited. Yes, sir.
Any of these perpetrators, do you know if they were in jobs that are with kids, either in school, centers, anything of that nature?
No, great question. We have not identified that any of these offenders are in positions where they have care of children.
And you mentioned how some offenders would communicate with each other, sharing photos or whatnot. Is that any of these cases? Did any of them know each other?
These offenders, not necessarily known to one another, but at least one offender has provided information on other offenders, and it's led to another case that's being investigated.
Just because they know each other? And
It's another part of the country, so they know each other online. Yes, sir.
Can you tell us which one is the registered sex offender, and then I have a follow-up.
I believe his name is Heyman.
Heyman?
Yes, sir.
Benjamin?
Yes.
We find him on the sex offender registry in Virginia.
He is on the sex offender registry in Virginia. He was convicted and put on the sex offender registry in 2018.
Okay, I have a question for the chief. I came out here, Chief, when you held another one of these news conferences. It was December 28th of 23, I believe it was, and you named 10 men in this very similar sting. Once I was assigned this, I went back and I just picked 4 of those names of the 4, just out of the blue, 4 of the 10, and all those charges were nollied. Were you aware of that? Are you aware that any of the other 6 that I didn't search were nollied as well? And did that lead to changes in how you're now conducting this operation?
Well, thank you, Paul. That's not the first time you've broken news to me. But I appreciate the information. It's certainly something we'll follow up on to see what, if anything, happened that calls for improvement. But, our criminal justice system is beyond the detectives who do this work, beyond the police officers. So whether it's inside of a courtroom with prosecutors and judges and sometimes juries, sometimes these cases go in a direction where we would rather it not go. We would rather these offenders who are habitual, who are very sick, demented people, be held accountable for their crimes committed against children, and we prefer incarceration. That's easier said than done sometimes, but we'll certainly go backwards and take a look at previous arrests and see what happened to those defendants. So I didn't know about it. Detectives certainly are aware of much more information regarding these cases as they travel through the criminal justice system. But it doesn't deter us from this work. So if a case, whether it's one of these cases or any other criminal case, doesn't go the direction where we hoped it would go inside of a courtroom, that does not deter us from following the law and holding lawbreakers accountable. But it's disappointing to hear that. Matt.
In the same vein, you mentioned incarceration being the main option here. Do you think the penalty is harsh enough? And do you truly believe that these guys aren't able to go through rehab, be rehabilitated?
Yeah, I know I said that, and that's just with the benefit of experience, and certain types of criminal offenders are certainly worthy of rehabilitation and second chances. It's just been my experience that people who commit this particular crime don't do well with changing their stripes. And you can see some of the age ranges of the persons that we arrested. I think the oldest one was 65 years old. He didn't wake up at 65 and start committing these types of crimes. He's likely committed them his entire life. So when I say that incarceration is the prescription for people who commit this type of crime, I say it knowing full well that many people who get introduced to our criminal justice system do get second chances and do get rehabilitated. But the folks who commit this crime, it's just not been my experience that they fall into that category. Nick Minock.
Nick Minock with WJLA. Chief, are Tier 3 registered sex offenders allowed to be at playgrounds or schools or places where there are day programs for children?
Nick, that specific question probably requires me to get a specific legal answer and give it to you. But if you have a broader question, I'd be more than happy to answer it.
Well, how about this one? Why hasn't the Fairfax County Police Department charged registered sex offender Richard Cox for allegedly going to rec centers, exposing himself allegedly to women and girls in locker rooms, and visiting Franconia Rec Center that has a licensed preschool, and also visited, according to the Park Authority, a playground? Why hasn't the police charged Mr. Cox in this case?
So, Nick, I'm going to go through this, and this is being recorded, so please take the time to go back and listen to my response to your very specific question about Richard Cox. Richard Cox, on June the 10th, 2024, was arrested by Fairfax County police officers. That case, when it made its way into a courtroom, was dismissed because the victim in that case did not show up. That's the first encounter. The next encounter we had with Richard Cox was on November 3rd, 2024, and he was in a shower in a locker room, taking a shower, and the policy of Parks and Rec allowed him and other persons to, and I'm reading this verbatim, to use the locker room of the gender that they identify with. So a crime was not committed. So he was not arrested by Fairfax County police officers. The next time we had contact with Richard Cox was on November 15th, 2024. He was also in a women's locker room. He was allowed to be in there, didn't commit a crime where we had probable cause to arrest him, so we did not arrest him. The next encounter we had with him, same month, November 16th of 2024, he was banned for the first time from Fairfax County Parks and Rec facilities. So if Richard Cox returns, and I don't know where he is right now, I don't know if he's still being held in Arlington, I'm sure you're going to share that with me. If Richard Cox returns to any Fairfax County Park and Rec facility, we will arrest him for trespassing. I will arrest him myself, okay? He has not returned, to my knowledge, to our knowledge. If he does return, he will be arrested for trespassing.
So I understand I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
No, well, the policy that Parks and Recs has allows Richard Cox and others like him to use the restroom, locker room of the gender that he identifies or she identifies with. So that policy was in effect. I believe it's still in effect. I don't believe it's changed. What has changed is that Richard Cox has been trespassed. He's been notified that if he returns to those facilities, that he'll be arrested. But any notion that the Fairfax County Police Department has never arrested Richard Cox, we have. And that got into a courtroom, and that case was dismissed because the victim of that crime did not show up.
She did ask for a continuance, and the prosecutor did not decide to help advocate for that victim. Going to Arlington, he has committed similar acts, according to court records of Arlington County, going into schools, going into rec centers in Arlington, into women's locker rooms, allegedly exposing himself to women and children. Arlington schools and the county board have the same policies that Fairfax County does. However, the police in Arlington and the prosecutor in Arlington, they're charging and prosecuting Richard Cox for very similar acts. So when you say there's no probable cause because of this policy, how is Arlington County allowed to charge and prosecute Richard Cox, but Fairfax County, as you say, is handcuffed in this situation?
Well, Nick, let me bring you back to June the 10th of 2024. we arrested him and charged him. So the way you pose the question seems to suggest that we've never arrested Richard Cox.
Now, I'm talking about the rec center incidents that happened in November.
Right.
And also in August.
So to meet the elements of exposure, a person has to commit and do certain things for probable cause to exist that an exposure, which is a crime, took place. The moment we have probable cause to arrest anyone, and I would put the frequency and volume of arrest press conferences, just like this one, up against any police department that you cover. We arrest bad guys. That's what we do. We don't shy away from arresting people who commit crimes. We establish probable cause, and when we have probable cause, we make arrests. And we do it in far greater volume than anyone I'm aware of. So when we don't have probable cause, we don't arrest.
So there is video of him going into the women's locker rooms at all 3 rec centers, Franconia, Aubreyville, and Oakmont. There's also video of him going into a playground at Franconia Rec Center. According to the Park Authority, there is a licensed preschool there. He's a sex offender, a Tier 3 sex offender. There's also witnesses, according to SCPD's own body cam video, that say he exposed himself to children in those women's locker rooms. That's not enough probable cause?
If he commits a crime of exposing himself, we will arrest him. What I'm trying to say somewhat gently is that his presence inside those locker rooms is not in and of itself a crime. That's not Kevin Davis's policy. That's not the policy of the Fairfax County Police Department. But his sheer presence inside of a locker room is not synonymous with exposure. He has to do certain things for an exposure to take place. When he does certain things for an exposure to take place, that would give us probable cause. And you know that when we have probable cause, we make arrests, as we did with Richard Cox back in June of 2024. We arrested Richard Cox. And if he commits a crime in Fairfax County, we'll arrest him again and again and again. And I know you know that because this police department, better than any police department I've ever been associated with, holds lawbreakers accountable. And Nick, to suggest that we don't is irresponsible.
You haven't arrested him for the rec center incidents. He didn't do anything differently, according to the witness in that Planet Fitness situation, than he did in these rec center bathrooms and locker rooms. So I'm trying to understand the difference between that June incident where you arrested him and these rec center incidents that occurred.
Yeah, the difference is a matter of probable cause. When we have probable cause that someone commits a crime, we're going to charge that person with the crime.
That's not enough.
Yeah.
That's what Arlington has for their.
Nick, I'm not going to compare and contrast our police department with whatever may or may not have happened in Arlington. I'm just going to tell our community this, and I know this case and this person is near and dear to you, and you're reporting on it, and you should be reporting on it. The trauma of victims is real. The trauma is real. So's the drama. So to keep perpetuating a dramatic scenario that seems to suggest that our police department intentionally chooses not to arrest someone who commits a crime is irresponsible journalism.
I disagree with that.
I understand. So
The Fairfax County Board of Supervisors repealed its policy allowing men in women's locker rooms. Would you go and arrest Richard Cox for what he did?
So, Nick, I don't answer hypothetical questions by a journalist who is fixed.
Their policy, that's why you're not arresting him, is that right?
No, it's not right, Nick. I was arresting bad guys when you were in diapers. Okay, I've been doing this job for a long time. The men and women in this room arrest bad guys. They don't have to ask my permission. They don't have to ask permission from the Board of Supervisors. We have probable cause and we make arrests. So to suggest that elected officials or elected prosecutors somehow guide the activities of detectives and police officers in Fairfax County is absurd. But it's dramatic, and it keeps you personally and singularly focused. Of all the journalists in this room and of all the journalists in the Washington, D.C. area, this is your baby. And I understand that you are dedicated to not letting this go. And when we have an occasion to arrest Richard Cox, I'll arrest him myself if I have to, and you'll be the first to know. So we're going to go on to Paul Wagner and then Bob. Go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
When these meetups are scheduled with the detectives and your arrest teams, number one, are body cameras in operation at the time? And secondly, who picks the place to meet up?
Yeah, I'll be rather non-specific about the places they choose to meet up because we want to be able to be successful in the future. But the detectives determine where those areas are. And the apprehensions that were made were, like I said, assisted by a violent crime suppression unit, and they are equipped with body-worn cameras.
And was there any resistance, and were weapons found on any of these men?
I'm not aware of any weapons that were found. A couple did try to flee and were quickly apprehended. But from the others, I don't know of any resistance or any force that was used.
Canada, is that the furthest you've ever had someone travel from?
I'm not sure. That's the furthest I know, but some of the detectives who have been doing this a long time would probably know more.
We can double check afterwards.
Yes, sir.
What is your advice, and Mike could always give you, what is your advice to parents? I know you kind of get a little bit, like, what would you tell them if they come to you, how do I spot this? How do I, tell you about this?
Well, I can speak from my experience as a parent. My daughter's grown now, but I will tell you, when they're in high school, they tend to be pretty self-sufficient, and so we think they can take care of themselves. And I would say that's probably the time that's most important to be having conversations with them, to be having dinner with them and having conversations. And something happens when you walk along beside each other and you're not staring at each other. So take the dog for a walk and talk to your kids about what they're doing, about what their friends are doing, right? Like if their friends are doing certain things and they're talking to you about it, they're probably doing it too. Right, so you kind of know where their head's at and what they're being exposed to. Again, I would point parents to look at that missingkids.org webpage and get further advice about things that they should be alerted to, aware of, actions they should take to protect their children. But this is very much something that can't just be on the police department. It can't just be on the parents. Like these people are out there preying on children, and we have to work together to make sure our children are not victims of theirs.
I know we have like names, ages, where they're from, and you mentioned earlier that you don't believe any of these are teachers. Do we have a sense of who these people are? Like specifically preacher, lawyer, doctor, gardener?
I believe in your package their professions are laid out, and we can get you.
Information on each one as a separate aside in your packets.
Yeah, that will be in the floor?
Yeah, we'll make sure you're provided that information. Thank you. Yes.
In terms of the individual who traveled from Canada, somebody came, from Maryland to Fairfax County, do federal authorities get involved at that point when you're crossing borders, when you're crossing state lines, to engage in these kinds of crimes?
I'm not aware of any federal authorities that are getting involved in any of these cases. They're coming to Fairfax County to victimize children here, so we can make those charges.
Is there a timeline as to when the operation began and when you ended it?
Yeah, the operation started in May and went through May and June. Although, like I said, there was at least one offender who was paying an undercover detective online for several months before they decided to agree to meet.
Oh, can you tell us more about that one?
I don't have in front of me which one that specifically was, but I will get that for you. Mm-hmm. Again, we thank you all for coming today. This is really important. Kids are out of school. They need your attention more than ever, so we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all so much for coming out today. We are going to be posting all this information with the stuff that we talked about on our blog and on our socials at Fairfax County PD. Thank you.
Are you guys still